The last message that 17-year-old Zion Foster sent before she disappeared stated that she was on her way home. The teenager told her mother and boyfriend that she was going out that night with her favorite cousin, something she did at least twice a month. But when her mother reached out to him for help finding her the next day, the cousin delivered some surprising news. He said he had not seen or spoken to Zion in years. Mother of 6 Sierra Milton woke on the 5th of January, 2022 to find that her eldest daughter, Zion Foster, had not returned home the night before. Zion was a 12th grader at East Detroit High School. She had only just celebrated her 17th birthday in November. Like most teenagers, Zion had experienced a rebellious streak. She had threatened to run away from home and had even done so the year before, twice. At 16 years old and frustrated with her mother's rules, she had run to her grandmother's house. Convinced to return home, she remained for only a few days before leaving again. That time caused enough concern for Sierra to call the police, but it was another false alarm. The teenager was struggling with her granny's recent cancer diagnosis, as well as her own desire for independence. That January morning was different. Zion had completed her serving shift at the Detroit Wing Company the night before. She had asked permission to leave the house after returning home from work. The teenager was honest about who she would be spending time with, her favorite cousin, Jaylen. Under these conditions, Sierra agreed and watched Zion walk out the door. That was shortly before 11 p.m. The next day, the 17-year-old's boyfriend, fellow high schooler Vertez Gonzalez, messaged Sierra. Had she heard from Zion? Because he could no longer reach her. The last text message he received was at 12:59 a.m. It read, OMW, meaning on my way. But Zion didn't make it home. Calls to her phone went straight to voicemail. Messages sent throughout the night were not being received. Finally, at 8:53 a.m., he wrote to her asking if she was alive, followed by saying this was the worst thing ever. Adding to the distress over Zion's absence was the response Sierra received from her cousin, Jaylen Brewer. Despite what her daughter had told her, Jaylen responded that he had not been with Zion the night before. He asked Sierra exactly how often Zion had claimed she was spending time with him. Once or twice a month, she said. He messaged her back in frustration. Zion's lies about him were sneaky and not safe, he said. But why would she lie about spending time at his house? He suggested that she was likely spending time with someone who lived near him. Zion shared location tracking on her phone with boyfriend Vertez. This tracking had placed her just across the street from Jaylen's home at 11:24 p.m. the night before. Vertez, admittedly a bit insecure in their relationship, had taken a screenshot of his girlfriend's location at exactly that time. Jaylen suggested that perhaps Zion was using him as a cover story when she was in fact at a neighbor's house. She must know someone else on the street or nearby. Jaylen helpfully suggested that Sierra go to the police, but he requested to be kept out of it. Vertez was not as easily persuaded. He flooded Jaylen with messages. He confronted the 23-year-old with the screenshot from his phone. In response, Jaylen sent back a video of his Ring camera system. There were no entries showing Zion at the house, he said. She was never there. East Point police were not inclined to take Sierra's missing person report with any sense of urgency. Her daughter had a history of being a runaway. According to the distressed mother, officers at the station did not hold back. The person in charge specifically told them that they were taking this as a runaway case. Receiving little support from law enforcement, Sierra took matters into her own hands. With the assistance of family and friends, a search effort for Zion was launched in the following days. They posted flyers, held rallies, and spoke to the media, saying they needed people's eyes and the police needed help. In the meantime, officers were eventually sent out to speak with Jaylen Brewer. Jaylen, Zion's self-professed favorite cousin, was in fact first cousins with her former stepfather. That is, he was cousins with Sierra's ex-husband. At 23, he was a father to 2 young children and had a long-term partner named Katrina. Sierra believed that her daughter and Jaylen had always been and remained close. According to Jaylen, they hadn't spoken in years. Officers found Jaylen at home with girlfriend Katrina Smith. They asked how he was doing and confirmed his name. They asked if he and his girlfriend knew Zion. Both said yes. Jaylen invited the officers in to look around the house. He told them that he had last seen his cousin nearly a year before, in May 2021. Jaylen continued to explain that it was Zion's mother and her boyfriend who seemed fixated on the idea that she had been with him that night. He had offered to show his Ring camera footage as well. When Sierra took a look at it, the mother thought there were gaps in the footage for the night of January 4th, which had obviously been deleted. But Jaylen insisted she was never there. East Point police found nothing suspicious in the search of the house. There were no indications that Zion had been there. They listened while Jaylen explained his frustrations over being pulled into drama caused by a 17-year-old cousin with whom he rarely spent any time. He explained that he had left for work and they came back and went to get gas. Basically, this girl was never in his house, and she was known to be a runaway. She had run away 4 times, and every time she was at some guy's house. Her mom knew this. Her mom was just playing it a certain way, and it was making him very uncomfortable. He repeated that she was known to be a runaway. The officers said they would assume Sierra would tell them that information. Jaylen thanked them, and the officers told him to enjoy the rest of his night. Jaylen may have been fooling the East Point police at this stage, but not Sierra Milton. She had indeed watched to see who her daughter left with from the house, and she often greeted Jaylen herself in the driveway when he came by to collect her. She knew he was lying. He told her he hadn't seen or been in contact with Zion for 3 years, which was impossible when he had been in her driveway and given her a hug. Perhaps the easiest way to verify if Zion had been across the street from her cousin's house, as her location data suggested, was to check the neighbor's doorbell cameras. At about 11:15 p.m. on January 4th, a white sedan, the car known to be driven by Jaylen Brewer, was captured pulling into his driveway. Emerging from the vehicle were 2 individuals clearly seen walking into the house, 1 male and 1 female. Jaylen had driven Katrina to work just before 11 p.m. that night. She was on the midnight shift at a manufacturing job. The shift spanned from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. The second individual who entered the house at 11:15 could not have been Katrina. Phone location data would later confirm the 2 individuals captured entering the home were Jaylen Brewer and Zion Foster. The camera did not show Zion leaving. At 1:41 a.m., the same camera from across the street captured Jaylen pulling his car out of the driveway and then backing it in. The trunk then faced the backyard. After a few minutes, the car drove off. It returned to the house less than 10 minutes later. Search warrants were obtained for the house and the car. Inside the house, the search was fruitless. The contents of the car were carefully itemized and examined, but there was no clear evidence indicating what had happened to Zion. That is, until law enforcement brought in the cadaver dogs. The dogs clearly indicated at the trunk of Jaylen's car. On January 19th, the 23-year-old, accompanied by a friend who was a lawyer, voluntarily sat down with detectives. It was clear that he had lied about being with Zion on the night that she disappeared. Jaylen came forward to offer what he claimed was a truthful version of events from that night. He had picked up Zion from her home and brought her back to his place. He put his 2 children, boys aged 1 and 2 years old, to bed, then joined Zion downstairs in the living room. Detectives asked if they mixed up the weed and rolled up and started smoking. He confirmed they were just watching TV and chilling. She was telling him about how her relationship with her mom was a lot better than the last time she talked to them, and about her boyfriend, about prom, about her job and everything. She was telling him how she was working on getting an apartment and everything. Jaylen said they smoked some marijuana, which appeared to make Zion very sleepy. He saw her head tilt back as though she intended to take a nap while sitting upright on the couch. At that point, he went into the other room to pour himself a drink. Detectives asked about them just chilling, and if all of a sudden she just blanked out. He said not when he got up to go get himself something to drink. When he came back, he thought she was tired and had laid her head back. He figured he would let her sleep for a bit, whatever. Then about 15 to 20 minutes after that, he tried asking if she was good and ready to go home. She wasn't responding. When asked if the plan was for her to go back home, he confirmed it was. Jaylen reported that Zion's pulse was faint. Then he described her heartbeat as non-existent. His young cousin had simply died on his couch, he said. Instead of contacting 911, he panicked. Not knowing how she died, he thought it would appear as though he had killed her. He explained that her heartbeat was getting very faint and her breathing was almost non-existent. He mentioned they had been vaccinated, and they had smoked what was normal marijuana. So he freaked out because this looked terrible, this looked very bad. He didn't know what to do, so he took her and put her into his trunk. He put her in his trunk in his car, and he took her and put her inside of a trash can. Then he left. Detectives questioned how Jaylen knew that Zion was dead. According to his story, the 17-year-old had inexplicably and very abruptly stopped breathing. One detective summarized the scenario. Her head tilted back on the couch, she was still alive at that point, he probably just figured she was tired or whatever. Then he started shaking her and she didn't wake up. He checked her pulse and could see she wasn't breathing or anything like that. So at that point, what was he doing? He said he was freaking out. The detective asked at that point in time if he thought she was definitely dead. Jaylen said yes. The detective wanted to clarify. Was she dead? Did he think she was dead at that point? Or did she still just have faint breathing? Jaylen said if there wasn't anything there was nothing at that point. The detective asked if he knew the difference between dead and alive. He asked again if she was dead. Jaylen said she wasn't breathing, so he assumed that meant she was dead. He said her heartbeat was unreadable. He couldn't feel a heartbeat or anything. So he would say she was dead, definitely. The detective said he wanted Jaylen to show them the dumpster because he didn't want to make a mistake. Obviously, if she was still there, they needed to recover her. If not, then they needed to take the steps to locate where she was at. He asked if Jaylen was okay with that. Jaylen said absolutely. Jaylen led detectives to the dumpsters in Highland Park where he claimed to have left Zion's body weeks before. Jaylen told detectives that Zion had been at his home for roughly 2 hours before she died. This would have placed her time of death at just past 1 a.m. Cell phone records showed her device dropped off the network at 1:15 a.m., corresponding to the time that she stopped responding to messages from Vertes. Jaylen told detectives that he had not deleted any data from his device since the night of Zion's death. However, they found that he had conducted a full factory reset of his phone just 2 days later, effectively wiping everything held on his device. Nonetheless, the movements of his phone could be pieced together. This data placed Jaylen at the dumpsters in Highland Park at 1:48 a.m. He claimed to have placed her in the dumpster on the right. There was no longer any sign of her there. A detective walked up to Jaylen and asked him to open the dumpster. Jaylen said it was already open. The detective asked if he had closed it. Jaylen said yes, he had closed it. When asked where he had parked his car, he said right by it, right in front of it. The detective asked if he had backed into it or pulled forward so he was side by side. Jaylen indicated how he had positioned the car. When news of Jaylen's confession broke, people were shocked. One person said that Jaylen admitted his baby cousin just died and that he threw her in a dumpster like she was trash. When Jaylen sat down for a follow-up interview the next day, January 20th, inconsistencies began to emerge in his story. He now claimed that the two had taken acid that night. It was her response to the psychedelics that must have caused her heart to stop. Of course, this explanation was about as likely as his previous assertion that the marijuana had caused her death. The detective attempted to leverage these new claims to compel a confession. Perhaps Jaylen would use the drugs as an excuse for his actions, for whatever steps he took to kill his younger cousin. Jaylen said he was trying psychedelics. The detective asked if he thought that killed her. Jaylen asked if the detective meant if he had a freaking momentary moment where he didn't know what he was doing. The detective said no. Jaylen explained that she also took it herself. The detective asked him to let him pose a question. The problem with those drugs was that when you're on them, you don't know what you're doing. That's the reason people take them, right? He asked if Jaylen did something when he was under the influence because he was trying to figure this out, and that would make complete sense. When he dropped acid, did he have some kind of episode? The detective said he wasn't saying it was okay, but it was completely understandable. Jaylen said he just didn't think that was the effect it had on her, and whether it was positive or negative, it does a lot to make your brain react. The detective agreed it does a lot and said he was going to tell Jaylen right now. It made sense to him now. It all made sense. Did Jaylen understand that? Because the detective was sitting there trying to figure out how this nice young guy could ever hurt anybody. But it made sense now. That wasn't really Jaylen at that point, it wasn't Jay. Did he understand that? If he did something under the influence, the detective needed to know that because that was a big difference and he could understand and appreciate that. The detective failed to get a confession. Without this admission and without locating Zion, there was not enough evidence to proceed with an indictment for murder. Jaylen was placed under arrest and held in custody for one count of lying to police. The statement he made to police actively deceiving them about the whereabouts of Zion Foster, the health and safety of Zion Foster, and his interaction with her. In June of that year, Jaylen spoke with detectives again. This time, only the audio was recorded. At that time, he changed his story once more. Jaylen took back his claim that the two had taken acid that night. That part was not true. Other smaller details of the story changed as well. He no longer described Zion as passed out on the couch. Now she was on the floor. He said he had felt pressured by police to offer more information, so he made up a more elaborate story to appease them. He said something like he had left out the part about the LSD, but yeah, they both took a hit of LSD and it must have hit her differently, hit her wrong. Someone asked if he was saying this happened or if they were telling him this. He was asking if they were telling him something incorrect or false. Garbage collection trucks working in Highland Park were tracked to specified areas in local landfills. The task of sorting through mounds of trash from all over the Detroit area, compiled over several weeks, was a daunting undertaking. An estimated 8-week project was launched. Dozens of volunteers, mostly wearing masks and hazmat suits, and assisted by heavy machinery, picked through layer after layer of the landfill, systematically looking for any sign of Zion. Officials stated they expected Phase 1 to take approximately 2 weeks, but they were doing what was right for the right reasons. They were going to do everything they possibly could to bring some degree of closure. It would never be complete closure, but some degree of closure and justice to this family. Meanwhile, Jaylen Brewer faced up to 4 years in prison for the lies he had told police. The Detroit Police Department, assisted by the FBI, continued to seek a warrant for murder. Jaylen made his case to the judge at his sentencing. He pointed out that 1, he did turn himself in. Yes, he lied, but he was not in the right state of mind. There was no way for him to prepare for a situation like that. He was scared. He didn't know exactly how she passed or what caused her to pass. He just knew 1 minute she was cool, she was fine, she laid back for a minute, and the next thing he knew, she was dead. He didn't know what caused it. He did not cause it or anything like that. He reacted stupidly out of fear and panic like he had never felt before in his life. The judge questioned his account. So he thought she died and then he disposed of the body just like that? That was his choice? Jaylen said he did not know what to do. He sat for at least 10 minutes just sitting there thinking about what to do and who to call. His kids were upstairs. They had just gotten into this place after struggling for like 2 years to get it, and everything was falling down around him. He wouldn't have any conversation about this, and he wished he could take it back. He would have called the ambulance and called her mom, because her mom was so sweet. He wished he could take it back. Nobody would be in this situation. At the very least, they would have been able to confirm what happened and everybody would have some sort of peace right now. Jaylen Brewer was sentenced to 23 months in prison. Jaylen's phone calls home to girlfriend Katrina and other family members were monitored closely while he was in custody. Occasionally, he would use another inmate's calling code to make his phone calls in a failed attempt to keep his conversations private. He was also in possession of a prohibited cell phone, which he used to exchange thousands of messages with Katrina. Repeatedly in his calls, Jaylen would ask if anything major had happened. This seemed to be a poorly concealed attempt to ask whether the massive search of the landfill had located anything or anyone there. In one call, he said the most logical and possible thing, right, was that there was nothing major or new. Due to that, there was a last effort to find anything, and that was basically the most logical thing he came up with statistically. He told someone to keep their head up, but then said to stop talking. He knew, but certain things shouldn't be spoken about. Jaylen's concerns over the search for Zion were telling. If his story was truthful and she had died abruptly from an unknown and non-violent cause, then there would be every reason for him to want her found. Finding Zion would exonerate him, the quicker, the better. Wishing her to be found should also be the sentiment of a loving cousin. Curiously, over and over again, he expressed his relief that no major developments had occurred in the search. As the final days of the landfill project drew near, he referred to it as a search for something specific. In one call, he noted that today was the first day and tomorrow was the second. That was when they would stop the search. He told the person to stop searching and not worry about it. Jaylen served just over 9 months before being granted early release. He had been placed in a special 90-day incarceration program. This boot camp was designed like a military program in which inmates convicted of certain crimes could better themselves while inside. In turn, they were rewarded with early release. It had been nearly a year and Zion had not been found. An indictment for murder had not been sought. And now the prime suspect had returned to his home and his family.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
People questioned why this man was free and how he could admit to what he did and still be let free. Jaylen Brewer's freedom was short-lived. On the 13th of June 2023, after a year-and-a-half investigation, the Detroit Police Department was finally granted a warrant for arrest. Officers approached him and said they were going to need his driver's license to verify who he was. They asked if he had his license. He said yes, he had it. The 24-year-old would face charges of second-degree murder as well as tampering with evidence. Upon his arrest for Zion's murder, 2 additional cell phones were taken. Despite the factory reset that he performed on his device, investigators were able to retrieve some of the activity. His search history had been held in cloud storage. On January 7th, 3 days after dumping his cousin's body in a dumpster, Jaylen performed a handful of Google searches. Are garbage trucks also compactors? What is the force of a garbage truck compactor? How do police get your phone history? And how do you know if police are watching you? In addition to these incriminating searches, investigators found that in the months before the incident, Jaylen had performed a number of disturbingly suggestive searches for pornographic content containing the words cousin and step-cousin. Experts were able to retrieve the video results of these searches, some of which were reportedly very violent as well as graphic in nature. As the case approached trial, a preliminary hearing offered more insight into the additional evidence that had emerged since Jaylen's release. This hearing also may have offered Jaylen's defense team a new theory. At the hearing, Vertez Gonzalez testified that he believed his girlfriend was taking regular medication for epilepsy. He told the court that Zion told him she had seizures and that without her medication, they became more frequent and severe. In one instance, Vertez saw Zion become momentarily faint, slouching forward before regaining her composure after just a few seconds. This episode, he believed, could have been a seizure. The court asked if he had ever seen her have a seizure. He said he thought so, yes. When asked why he thought she was having a seizure and to explain what happened, he described it as just like a little pass-out, that was it. Just a quick little moment. When asked if she passed out, he confirmed. The court asked if she was foaming at the mouth. He said no. They asked if she was shaking uncontrollably. He said no. He said she just passed out for a quick second. Sierra Milton, whose youngest child was in fact diagnosed with such a condition, testified that this was not the case. Zion had never suffered a seizure. Hundreds of pages of medical records covering years of treatment appeared to support Sierra's assertion. Nonetheless, Jaylen Brewer's version of events was now being presented in a new light. Perhaps Zion's condition led to her death suddenly in his living room. Maybe she had a seizure. The prosecution's opening statement emphasized that there were only 2 people who could say exactly what happened inside of the house that night. One of them was Zion, and she was gone. The other was the defendant, and the jury would hear that nearly every time he spoke about what happened, his story changed. Although he got rid of Zion's body, the jury would see that he left behind a trail of digital evidence that was damning and would show that the circumstances all led to one and only one explanation for why Zion left his house in the trunk of his car that night, because he murdered her. The defense's opening statement countered that Zion also had a history of seizures and taking seizure medications. On this particular day, she came over to Jaylen's house and they were smoking. Jaylen told the police that after some time, she had shallow breathing and a faint heartbeat. He checked her to see if she was alive and she was dead. He then feared that because he was doing drugs, which was still federally illegal, he could be blamed for something and he panicked. Zion's phone disconnected from the network at 1:15 a.m., the same night that she disappeared and was then lost with her. But the teenager's previous cell phone was safe at home. Sierra Milton handed this device over to police. On it, they found months of correspondence between Zion and her favorite cousin. The messages he sent ranged from subtle and unsettling to deeply inappropriate. At times, the messages were sexually explicit. Over 4,000 distinct texts were retrieved from Zion's old device. In them, Jaylen routinely invited her over to his home while his girlfriend was away. He offered to put her up in his basement if she ran away from home. He also advised her on how she might evade police if she ran away once more. Wayne County Assistant Prosecutor Ryan Elsey described the texts as pervasive, at times complimentary of her intelligence and looks, at other times probing in an immature way. For example, he suggested to her that other people thought they were a couple. He said Katrina, the mother of his children, was jealous of her. Wasn't that crazy? Did that make sense to her? He then bragged to Zion about how easily he could get with women. At one point, he called himself a god. Prosecutor Elsey concluded by telling the jury that the 23-year-old had been grooming his younger cousin for years, that he fantasized about her, and that on January 4th, he must have acted on his impulses. This was the twisted motive that led to her death. Jurors heard about how Jaylen learned that Katrina was pregnant with their third child on the day that he brought Zion to his house. Messages between the couple showed how he had lied to her about what he was doing after he dropped her off at work earlier that day. Her nausea and hot spells had led to a trip to the emergency room. Hours later, the nausea resumed. She messaged repeatedly that she felt too ill to remain at work and asked him to pick her up. At 1:25 a.m., she wrote that she thought she needed to come home. At 1:26 a.m., she said she didn't feel good. A few minutes later, she wrote that her stomach hurt, she felt sick, and kept getting hot and cold. Jaylen's response was simply telling her she could make it. He did finally pick her up that night at nearly 3 a.m. When he did so, she noticed a deep scratch across his collarbone. He told her that the cat had scratched him, deep enough to draw blood. Odd, Katrina thought. The cat had never scratched that deep before. The trial lasted 2 full weeks in May 2024. Jaylen chose not to testify. The state called 32 witnesses. The defense did not call any. The case against Jaylen was largely circumstantial, though it was nonetheless compelling. A forensic anthropologist who reviewed Zion's medical history determined that the only condition she suffered that could possibly have led to her death was asthma. Though an asthma attack would present as the exact opposite of what her cousin described, instead of quietly passing out and experiencing a faint heartbeat, Zion would have been struggling to breathe. It would have been very clear that she was in distress. Vertes repeated his testimony that Zion had told him she suffered from seizures. He also admitted that his girlfriend was known to fib quite a bit. It seems that Zion had liked to tell stories. The prosecution summarized, when he brought her to his house late at night on January 4th of 2022, behind the back of his pregnant girlfriend who was at work at the time, he brought Zion over to his house late that night. And she left that house in the trunk of his car on a night where he had an unexplained gash on his collarbone. What did the jury think happened inside that house that night? Did she die of complications from something? Did she die of a seizure? The defense argued there was a claim that he did all this, that he did what he did because he was afraid of getting caught for marijuana, afraid of getting busted for pot. The jury could use their common sense. If you go to a marijuana dispensary, there's not going to be a team of ATF agents waiting to bust you and take you to federal prison for that. It was about the equivalent of a parking ticket. Had anyone ever heard of somebody getting rid of a body to avoid a parking ticket? The defense reminded the jury that Vertes himself said Zion told him specifically she had a history of seizures. The question was asked if he was concerned when he saw this. He said no, he was not concerned because he knew of a history of seizures she had told him about and that she was on medication for it. His understanding was that if she did not take the medication, the seizures would be that much worse. Sierra Milton and the rest of Zion's family waited as the jury went into deliberations. Sierra expressed hope that they would see so many inconsistencies and see through the lies to see the truth, that he murdered her daughter and disposed of her with absolute disregard for her life. The jury returned in only 30 minutes. When asked how they found on count 1, they said guilty. When asked how they found on count 2, they said guilty. Everyone was asked to raise their right hand to confirm the verdict. Jaylen Brewer maintained his innocence of the murder at his sentencing hearing. He said he knew the picture was already painted in court and established in people's heads. It was what it was. But Zion was not in any way violated or hurt at all. He never wanted it to seem like he never tried to apologize. That wasn't true. What he said was that he knew his apologies were worth nothing and couldn't change what he did. Before announcing his decision on the length of term that Jaylen would serve, Judge Donald Knapp outlined the convict's failure to accept any responsibility for the murder, for disposal of Zion's body, for lying to police, and for causing so many delays in the investigation through his lies. The father had left his 2 young children alone in the house. He manipulated and lied to family, and ultimately he acted alone. It was unlikely, according to Judge Knapp, that he would ever be rehabilitated. Jaylen Brewer was sentenced to 30 to 90 years in prison for the murder and another 5 to 10 years for tampering with evidence. These terms were to be served consecutively, one after the other. Sierra's body was trembling when the sentence was read. But when it was read, and it was so matter-of-fact, she was so happy. They saw that Zion was loved. She is loved. She was fought for, and this was the result. So she was happy. She was happy that, in the end, this was justice. And for Jaylen, Zion's father said he thought he was smart, he tried to be slick. But the people saw him for what he was. He wasn't clever at all. He hoped he would never get out. Zion Foster's body has never been recovered. Over 70 volunteers and law enforcement searched the landfill for nearly 6 months before finally admitting defeat. As of the publication of this video, Jaylen remains at an intake facility in Wayne County, awaiting his placement in a general population prison. This was the tragic case of Zion Foster, a young woman who trusted her cousin, only to have that trust betrayed in the most horrific way possible. Her family continues to fight for her memory and hopes that one day, they will be able to bring her home. Every crime leaves a trace, and we're here to follow them. Subscribe for more real, haunting stories you won't forget.